Is Islam a religion of peace?
Yikes. So that, how
That's
do you
why I
even,
asked.
yeah, like
That was
how
the
do you
perfect
even,
reaction.
I mean, to say that something is of peace, the
Well,
way that they
let
put
me
it,
add some
yeah,
context to the question
yeah,
because I've debated Muslims before. Both as a Christian, I'm a former Christian now, atheist, but Christianity is against Islam. Some of them will
hmm,
lie and say that they're not, but they are. They are totally
yeah,
against it. It's the religion of the devil.
yeah,
However, and obviously as an atheist, I don't believe any of this shit is real, right?
hmm,
So I would question all of it. But I remember debating Muslims, and they were adamant Islam is the religion of peace, the religion of peace.
hmm,
So, and that's the story I got, and I
yeah.
offered my own pushback. I'm curious as to what your interpretation of that statement is. Both, as you can recall, if you could put your Muslim hat back on, would you make
Hmm.
that statement, and how would you evaluate the statement now as a non-Muslim?
Well, I can start by telling you what I thought of that as a Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was back when, I was kind of blind to a lot of things in Islam because I was just seeing it from the angle of a Muslim who's happy with Islam for the most part. Especially when Islam or Muslims were under attack by, I don't know, bigots or racists online or this and that. Uh, I thought of it as, I believe that, Islam as a word also could mean peace, right? That's what you sometimes hear, that it literally translates to peace. But what it actually translates to is submission. And
Mm-hmm.
they might say there's peace in submission, and you've heard all that stuff if you're a
Yeah.
Christian. But what it literally means is submission to God, because we are slaves of God. Like if you hear a name like Abdullah or Abd, whatever, Abd means slave. So it's just that blatant that it is about the submission to the will of God and his ways and his laws, and it's all for the greater good, but it's not always for the greater good in terms of thriving as a people even. It's because that's the way that God wants it, and that's what gets us the most reward and doesn't get him angry, basically. So with that being said, no, I don't think it's a religion of peace. I don't know what a religion of peace would be, to be honest. That's such a big label. For a religion to be of peace, there would have to be ways to handle all conflict in the best ways, and head towards
Mm.
peace as the outcome. I can't say that it is peace for people outside of it. So, from an insider perspective, maybe it is the religion of peace because, as someone has put it before, if everyone in a totality, like if everyone in North Korea is forced to be happy with their regime, it does look peaceful, right? Because everyone is under the that totalitarian rule,
Mm-hmm.
and there is the illusion of peace, but that's not the peace that you and I mean.
Yeah, it really depends on how you're defining peace. If you're
Hmm.
defining peace as situation where there's no apparent conflict, well then sure, anything can be said to be of peace. If you are a tyrant who rules a land through fear, it appears to be peaceful because there's no apparent conflict. But that's not real peace. That's not a type of peace anyone really gives a shit about when they're talking about peace. Like
Yeah.
that's not the type of thing that people want. They want not to, if that's all they want when they say the word peace, then really they exist in a state of fear, which I would argue is not a peaceful state of
The
existence.
the thing is though, they're blind to it. So you're saying it's not what the people want, but it might be what they want. It's just not what everybody in the world wants, and it's, in my opinion, not what a healthy mind that is free from, that indoctrination would want. But to them, it may be something that they very much want, and that gets a little tricky because when you want to have a discussion about that kind of thing, you got to define the terms first, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll get very pedantic, but it is necessary because, like you said, your definition of peace and theirs very different.
Would it be fair to say that for the people who do want that, the reason they want it is because they fear anything less?
Yes, and they don't realize that it's always fear. Like sometimes they're actually convinced that this is the best way to go. But why is it the best way to go? Because God said so. And why do we have to do it? Because God said so. Because otherwise we're going to go to hell.
Which is all
They,
begging the question.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a lot of this arbitrary stuff that isn't like for the best of society or anything, but it's just because God said so, and there must be a wisdom in it. That's a term that we always know as Muslims, that God has a wisdom in it. We just don't know it.
You talked
Hmm.
about when growing up, and you would see people of other religions or on in movies or whatever, and know that there was these other people living a life apart from Islam. It would be explained away to you as God is just testing them, and the rewards are for them here on earth, but then they go to hell. But you just accepted all of that, and it sounds like that's the type of thing that most Muslims would accept. But why were they
Hmm.
so quick to accept it if there was no test to know whether that was true? Like, why? I guess why wasn't
Hmm.
that explanation questioned?
Well, here's the thing. I'm talking about children for the most part, right? And
Got
once you get past that stage as a child,
it.
where,
Hmm.
like I said, your whole world, everyone around you is Muslim. That's just the default.
Right.
You know how children are quick to say yes. Like there are
Yeah.
a lot of children who nod along, or they're like, yeah, yeah, I get it when they don't. And that's just something you did as a child to get through life because you couldn't sit down and analyze everything you were told.
Hmm.
And then I think once you've cemented that into a child, and I don't mean to say it that it sounds like it's malicious or intentional. It's just what everybody did to their children as their parents did to them, right? That's just an essential knowledge and skill that you had to have in life is religion.
How to
Um,
indoctrinate your children into religion
yeah,
so that they will
it's
believe and not go to hell.
Yeah, and I mean, it starts with literal birth. Like once someone is born, you're supposed to say the call to prayer in their ear the moment they come out, and you like clean them up and stuff. Like
Mhm.
that's symbolic and like, literal. That's how soon you hear. So it's the first thing that you hear is the sound of the call to prayer. Um, yeah, and
Interesting.
again, that's not like some fringe interpretation or the extremists or the fundamentalists. That's just a
Right.
normal thing. Like,
Because one of my principal criticisms of Islam is that it's so weak in the sense that any criticism of it cannot be tolerated. And to me, that's a sign of weakness. That means, like, if your religion can't stand up to criticism, it's weak. And the more your religion fights back against criticism, the weaker it is. And
mhm.
that's how I viewed it. But what would have been what's your impression of that? Do you
It's funny
agree or
because
disagree?
as you ask me, I'm thinking about it as a Muslim, weirdly enough. So I have an answer for you from that angle.
Okay.
Um, I was thinking, did they block like websites that were, talking bad about Islam? I don't know because again, the internet wasn't that big at the time,
Mhm.
but TV was the major censored platform there because how else were you going to reach people's homes except for TV? I wasn't aware of radio. Like in my time, radio wasn't that big of a thing except when you're in traffic. But on TV, for example, I remember one example that's not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago or less than 10 years ago. On Egyptian TV, they interviewed this atheist, which is a big deal because you don't just let an atheist talk on TV. But within minutes, they were just hurling insults at him and being offended when he answers like, "Yeah, I don't believe in God," or "No, I don't think your God created the world." Like he's not being antagonistic or anything. They're just bringing him on to shame him, basically. That's the only discourse you'd ever see around religion, or them talking about secularists and atheists and Christians and this and that. Maybe you'd have a Christian versus Muslim kind of debate thing, but that is a different category, really. So yeah,
Mhm.
it was very heavily censored. Um, and I've come to learn, again, that wasn't on my radar at the time, but I've come to learn that there are reformists or critics. So some of them aren't even like completely not Muslim or anything. They just think a little differently and they're pushing back. They'd either get jailed, depending on the country, jailed, maybe even killed or tortured in a prison somewhere. Um, or they just say, at the very least lose their job and this and that. So that was another form of censorship, and it tends to people keep saying like when was the last time someone got executed for apostasy or something like that. They don't These statistics aren't really counted, if that makes sense, and especially when there's
Hey, where's
bogus.
Tabby?
Yeah, that's one of
Sorry.
the two. um Especially when it's like bogus charges for this or that. It's not counted as someone was jailed for blaspheming. um So that was another form of
So what do
censorship.
they just make up like a different charge or?
Oh yeah, it'll be either that or they would exaggerate something else, or
Why don't they just tell the truth and say they were jailed for blasphemy?
in
Like
some
why would?
countries they do. It really
Oh.
depends on where you are. Um, and that's the thing. There's like various levels of how deeply Islam runs in these communities, but there's a bare minimum that all of these Arab countries, for example, they have to treat religion a certain way or treat Islam a certain way. Um, but yeah, anyway, you think it's weakness,
Mhm.
being not being able to withstand criticism. Um, the angle that I thought of it as a Muslim, I always said, oh, yeah, it is okay to question. And I'm always told that every time I want to talk to a Muslim or ask them questions, especially scholars or sheikhs, they say, "Eh, it's always good to think. God tells us to think. It's always good to question. But that's obviously, don't get too deep into it. And then it's the devil. Um,
So
but
then really they're talking out of both sides of their mouth because
yeah,
really it's not okay to think or to ask questions. There's a
no,
devil involved if you ask the wrong question.
it's okay to think as long as you arrive at the conclusion that they're telling you, or as long as you leave it up to God, where you
That sounds
basically
like not
say,
thinking.
well, thank you. But
That
they
sounds
don't
exactly the
see it
same
that
as not
way.
thinking.
They don't see it that way. And I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation just like not that long ago.
All of the bad things that come out of the Middle East, the United States and other Western countries will use that as evidence for how evil Islam is. I mean, you saw this a little bit in the Bush administration. Well, hell, you saw it in the Obama administration when people were
Yeah.
accusing him of being a Muslim. To be accused of being a Muslim and a
Mhm.
politician in this country means that you should never elect that person if they're a Muslim, right? And
Yeah.
certainly in the Trump era, where he banned Muslims from coming into the country, and that was
Mhm.
celebrated. But the excuse was, well, look at the things they do, as if everyone was an advocate of that,
Mhm.
So it sounds like
But
both
yeah.
sides are doing it to show the evils of the other country, the religion associated with those other
Mhm.
areas of the world. What would your impression be of the Taliban? Did you know about the Taliban in Afghanistan or groups like that in the localized regions and the way that they apply law? And if
Mhm.
so, what were your beliefs about them?
So I believe that they were misunderstanding religion. They were doing this for political gain, which many would argue they are doing it for political gain. But there's definitely a religious element to it, or at least a lot of them do believe that they're doing this for for God, for a religion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would even argue that not everything they do is strictly Islamic because they overstep what sometimes they overstep what the law, the Islamic law says they should do. But the brutality of it isn't that far off from what religion allows them to do, is what I'm saying. But at the time I just dismissed it all as no, those are terrorists are bad. Like we just know that. There was even some campaign I remember in Saudi Arabia that I don't remember exactly what the ads were, but at the end there would be a phrase that says in Arabic, terrorism has no religion. So basically, it's trying to like disconnect us from this idea that this terrorism is Islamic. We don't support that. And in some ways, it was a good message because it's telling people, hey, like, don't support this bad stuff.
Did you believe that the Taliban were terrorists?
Yeah.
Or
I mean,
was it taught that the Taliban were terrorists?
well, I didn't have it really depended on what kind of household you grew up in. Like right now, there's a huge part of Pakistan, like a lot of Pakistanis abroad and in Pakistan have some support for the Taliban. I didn't grow up in a household like that. I didn't get too much as a child into the politics of, like, for example, the Palestinian Hamas group.
Mm-hmm.
I think was the Taliban in the region at the time as well. I'm not sure, but I just thought of him as like, okay, I support the Palestinians' right to have land, and I don't know anything about terrorists. Like that's it.
Right.
So there was always this disconnect. Yeah.
Yeah, because and a lot of the reason I ask is a lot of people, a lot of ignorant people, um, simply call the Taliban terrorists because they don't know what the Taliban even is. And you could make an argument that they engage in terror, but as an organization, most of the people in uh, the region, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and surrounding areas, they don't view them as terrorists necessarily. They view them as an extremist government, but they're a government. and
Mhm.
certainly they don't view themselves, they view themselves as the legitimate government of Afghanistan, while they at the same time would recognize groups like ISIS or
Mhm.
Al-Qaeda as terrorists. Those are the real terrorists. We're in a
Mhm.
situation right now where we're going to have the Taliban, they're fighting ISIS.
Good.
They're
Yeah.
both, they're enemies of each other.
Yeah.
They're both our enemy to some extent, and this is one of those cases where the enemy of my enemy is not my friend.
Yeah.
But
I hope not.
if you ask a Taliban, yeah,
Mhm.
ISIS, they're terrorists. Well, how are they different than you? Well, we only control Afghanistan, and they're trying to, they're engaging in a caliphate that's trying to take over the whole Middle East, and they're spreading terror. So
Mhm.
terrorism is like one of those words that it depends on who's using it, right? You can apply it to anyone you want.
Yeah. I agree with that. At the time, it was all just dismissed as it's all terrorism. It's all bad because the prophet that I know or the prophet that I was taught, it wouldn't just go around killing people like that and doing acts of terrorism, because that's mostly what I've heard about. Not just the wars; it was also this event or that event and who owned up to it, and that was easy to just dismiss the whole thing as that's not my religion, and that's not what any Islam is. That's how I thought of it.
What was it specifically that made you kind of deconvert?
Okay, what made me deconvert? So it was all gradual. Like since my teenage years, I had questions, and the answers would become less and less satisfactory to me because I was at the stage of my life, as so many people are, where we start to think a little bit more critically and be a little less receptive to everything that we hear.
Mm-hmm.
And again, at the time, it didn't really shake my faith per se. Like I was still a Muslim. It was just a default. Again, I keep saying that word default. But over time, I would keep thinking of things and meeting new people and having new experiences. And like it changed, for example, how I felt about the LGBT changed bit by bit to the point that even the, I don't know, the B and the T part didn't really come into mind till not that long ago, a couple of years ago or 3 years
Usually the
ago.
B in LGBT is the least recognized and
Yeah.
acknowledged thing. It's the thing, and I know that from personal experience, and I talk about bisexual erasure all the time.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's not too terribly different here.
Hmm.
But you've met some LGBTQ plus people. They've changed your perspective. I'm
I
assuming you
mean,
used to think they were
yeah.
evil and realized that that doesn't
I
really.
mean, I thought they were kind of like rebels who are just trying to be little brats, and we want to do it because God said we can't do it. That's how
Mm,
I thought of it, and
mhm,
it didn't really shake my faith to meet them and see that they're good people, but it made me think, wait, like that's one thing that I was taught from religion that was absolutely wrong.
does
Like
it?
I
Yeah, I
see
was gonna say,
reality.
does it make sense?
It doesn't, like, aside from the fact that now I realize it wasn't a choice. There, some of them don't even know about our version of God and don't care, and seeing
Mm,
it from how they live their day to day, it was eye opening to me that there are other people out there whose default is not Islam. Like they don't, it doesn't really cross their mind, should I become a Muslim or not? That's just not a thought they have because it's not part of their life. And
right.
seeing it from that perspective, that really shook me a little bit. Um, and one of the main things really that didn't sit right with me, even in my teenage years, I would ask, what about the people who aren't Muslim? Because as a child, and I always thought that if those, like, for example, Americans aren't Muslims, why aren't we all going there right now, like informing them, or else they're going to go like die forever, burn forever, or whatever. It should be our job to do this all the time. Like, I shouldn't really worry too much about, you know, I don't know, getting a job and doing well in my career if I can save other people. And I
Mm-hmm.
suppose I would have made it perfect, like dawah person. They call them like someone who invites people into religion. Um, but I would ask, what about the people that I couldn't convince, or the people who've heard of Islam or have, read about it? They don't believe it still. Do they go to hell? And I'd be told basically, yeah, if you rejected Islam, you go to hell. I asked, what about all the people who haven't heard, like, or they've just heard about it in the news, but they haven't really, really thought about Islam at all or given it a thought? I was told they're going to be tested in the afterlife. And that got me thinking, what's the test? Like God's going to
I
bring me
thought
back.
this life was the test.
Yeah. What's the
So
point of a test that most of the world is not taken,
yeah,
or
if
they're
you're
taking
already
it very
taking a
poorly?
test and at
Yeah.
the end you don't get the answer, you get another test, like they get a do-over test.
Well, basically, yeah, they kind of get a do-over if they didn't get a good version of Islam, or they didn't get the accurate version, whatever that is. Which made
Okay.
me think, like, what's the point of this test that I am sitting through that they're
Mhm.
not? If it's all about intention, let me just live my life, and my intention is to be a good person and a
Right.
believer.
Then it's
Yeah,
actually better not to spread the
exactly. That's what I
religion.
was
Just
getting at. Yeah. Then we
Right.
shouldn't tell anybody about it. We should not tell anybody
So
about Islam because
you realize that yourself and ended up reversing course. What are you doing on TikTok and YouTube now?
so what got me onto all of this was I was moderating a space, a forum for ex-Muslims, because they not because I really wanted to invest more time into it, but I was lurking there a lot and started posting there sometimes, and sometimes making memes because it was a good way to blow off steams. Because I like to make niche memes. It's just a hobby of mine. Um,
Mhm.
and then they needed me as a moderator because there was so much incessant hate. There would be some like gory photos and labeled as one of the other TikTokers that are, I don't want to mention any names in this podcast, but um, yeah, things like that. So I had to moderate that space. And then I stumbled into an interview with Abdullah Samir on YouTube. And then
Mhm.
I stumbled into starting a TikTok because I started talking to him, and I'm like, I have a lot of thoughts about this. And even my conversation with him, he encouraged me by saying, you sound like you've thought through this a lot. I like, how you think, and you should be sharing this with others. But the reason why I'm doing it is, first of all, TikTok was an easy medium to get into. You don't need to invest that much time to make a piece of, I don't know, 15-second content, if you have the right, I don't know, skill or idea or whatever it may be,
Mhm.
or the right trend. But the reason why I'm doing this at all is because at a certain point I needed this. And I would get it from other content creators, but for the most part, I just shut them all out because I thought, um, they're just trying to lure me in, kind of thing. But I found that humor works the best, and there wasn't enough. Like there's never enough content about this kind of thing, coming out of Islam. We're not at that stage yet. So I thought, if I can make people feel less alone and less crazy, if they can see that others have went through the transition to the point that they're laughing about it because it is funny, in certain situations, certain stories, that could be a great help. And I've been seeing a lot of positive reaction that way, and it's helping me, keep going.
How fearful are you that there may be some retaliation or reprisal for what you're doing? I know that what you're doing is considered apostasy and blasphemy in
Mhm.
Islam, which hence the need for you to hide your face. What is the level of concern you have that the wrong person is going to see what you did or figure out who you are?
So, Um, I don't want to go into detail about what it is, but that would depend on my home country. That's part of it. When it comes to like legal terms, that depends on my home country.
Mhm.
But societal problems are countless, in terms of career, in terms of the community, that kind of thing. In
Right.
terms of just everybody I know, like maybe vilifying my family, for example, because they might just receive a lot of hate mail about, how could you raise such a person? Do you
Mhm.
see what you did? That kind of thing. There's actual, like, one of the things that got me to meet the YouTuber that I was talking about is because someone was trying to dox him, and I saw that attempt, and that's how I reached out to him. So that's a very popular way of ruining someone's life without actually having to physically harm them. So that is a very big concern that I have, and that's why I wear a mask, and I have to be
Mhm.
careful about what I say and what I show in my videos.
It sounds like what you're doing, you consider what you're doing worth the risk of that because you're continuing to do it.
Well, part of it is just stupidity. Like I started it, and I'm like, you know what? Like it, not stupidity, but more like eagerness. I would say that's part of it. Maybe wasn't that thought through in the beginning. Um,
Mhm.
Not realizing the full extent of the risk, or just being too eager. But also, I think what I'm doing is not hateful. For example, I know that a lot of other people get demonized for making a certain statement or another, but when people hear me talk for more than 2 minutes, they realize that I'm not doing this to just poke at Muslims or make fun of them or demonize them. I'm doing this for the people on the edge. I'm doing this for the people who have already left and need help, because it's the help's definitely not coming from the Muslims. And if in the process people don't like what I'm saying, if it's blasphemous, that's just for them to cope with. It's part of progress to be able to have them, grow that immunity to this kind of thing and not react violently to it.
Another bit of irony here might be the fact that they would excuse their attitude towards you by suggesting that you're trying to turn Muslims away from their people, when the reality is you're actually one of the few people trying to help people who come from a Muslim background. They may be ex-Muslims, but they're still your people.
They don't see them that way. No, they don't see us that way.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter if they see you that way. The fact of the matter is they used to be Muslims. They came from your community and they need help, and you're the only one who's helping them, and the governments and the traditionalists are not. That would be an objective fact, right?
And I want to say that kind of highlights, I've talked a lot about the similarities that we've had throughout this with the Islam and fundamentalist evangelical Christians, but this is one place that we depart, and that is that while I have to worry about my own, the ability for me to maintain my
I was going to say, because you're slightly in the shadows as well.
I am. So
you're not hiding your face, but you're hiding a lot of other things.
Exactly. So Sunny Shell is not my real name. And I have separated the Sunny Shell persona from my actual persona, because if the wrong person saw this, saw what I do, I would lose my job. I would lose, and I am in a position in my community that is a very, it's a position of prominence with the work that I do. I'll just say that. I don't have to worry about where it departs, is that I don't have to worry about my family being shamed or my life being in jeopardy or some of those things. I just worry about my job. That's the primary reason that I have a pseudonym. But I don't hide my face, because part of me is like, you know what? If that happens, I'll figure something else out. It would be difficult. And so I don't want to necessarily call attention to myself. But I don't have to worry about my personal safety or the safety of my family or my family shunning me. Actually, my family knows I do this. They support me. But my husband's family doesn't, and they would be very upset, and it would cause a lot of strife in our family. But there's still a difference. And that difference right there is the stark difference between, I think, I almost said the Islamic countries and the US, but I'm going to retract that, because I think it has to do specifically with a secular government versus a religious government, because we have
a constitution that prohibits that.
Well,
there are Christians in this country who,
but you know what, we are very much in danger. That constitution could be easily manipulated. It wouldn't take much, and we've seen that in recent years. So I think this highlights the danger of having a theocratic government that a lot of people are pushing for, that half of our country is pushing for. And so I think this can be a cautionary tale. You can be a Christian. You can be an evangelical Christian. Your safety is just as important to secularists as the rest of us, because we are making sure that your brand of religion isn't discriminated against. You never know who's going to end up in power. It may not be the evangelical Christians. It could be somebody else. And I think that's the important thing to take away from this.